All right, good morning, everybody, on this cold December morning. This is our last faculty corner for 2019, and it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Yatrik Shah from the Department of Physiology. Dr. Shah is a professor in the Department of Physiology and also internal medicine, and has been at Michigan for a little while. I don't know exactly how many years, but I want to say a decade or so.
Decade, exactly.
A decade, yeah. And he also is engaged very much in postdoctoral professional development, and recently has been the co-chair for the Pioneer Postdoc Program that may come up in the conversation. So, and if it doesn't, you can ask him after our event today. And interviewing Dr. Shah is Dr. Stephen Robertson. He's a postdoc in pharmacology, studying behavioral neuroscience. And the event is kind of based on Charlie Rose, maybe Charlie is not a good example, Terry Gross, or like in between two ferns. So basically, Stephen will be interviewing Yatrik, but then you as the audience at some point will be encouraged to ask questions also. So, form your questions in your mind as the discussions go along. So it will be their show. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. So I guess to get started, we just hear a little bit about your career path.
Wow. So I started. So my undergrad was in Bowling Green State University. So I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and then went to Bowling Green State University for my undergrad, and I really picked it out of the whim. It was 3 hours from where I grew up, and so it's far enough away from my parents, and close enough that I didn't pay out-of-state tuition. And so my goal at that time was to do medical school, and I think some of that had changed as I got into research. So I worked in a Drosophila lab for 3 years, and I started really liking research. I had enough research background that I was accepted into an equivalent of an MSTP program for, at that time the school was called Medical College of Ohio. And so it was an MD PhD program, and it was like one of these traditional, you do 2 years MD, 4 years PhD, and then you go back to your MD. And I didn't go back to my MD. And I think for MSTP students in general, it's a very difficult sometimes transition from going from their PhD, which is discovery-based work in many cases, and then going back into a classroom setting and a clinical setting. And so I like the research. I had kind of put out flyers for what kind of postdocs I could get from where I was coming from, and they were pretty established labs, and so I decided to forego my M3 and M4 years of medical school and go directly into a research postdoc. It was kind of the first time at that school that happened, and the flip happens quite often, where you have an MSTP or MD PhD student that decides they don't want to go back. But the issue is that this is all paid for. One of the advantages of MD PhD program is your tuition is paid for. And so they were asking me to pay back the tuition of those years. And so I'm still technically deferred. And so I could go back if I wanted to, but I've not gone back. And so the reason for I really like the lab setting, the environment, and I felt like that's the greatest impact I could make, and so that's why I decided to just pursue the research side of it. And so then I did an academic postdoc at the NIH, and so there was pros and cons to that. So the NIH is a wonderful place to do research because I don't want to say funds are unlimited, but there's a lot of funds for research. And so you can, depending on what lab you choose, funding is never an issue there. And so there's a lot you can accomplish. The negatives of doing a postdoc there were that it is very postdoc driven. And so there's no students, no undergrads, and so it's a very professional setting. And it's very business-like. The other was that because there is no major requirements, or I guess because there's no major funding limitations, there's not a major onus for postdocs to write fellowships. And I think that is an important component to training here for both students and postdocs. And then the third negative, I would say, is that you don't get much mentoring experience because it's all postdocs. And so you may mentor a junior postdoc a little bit, but outside of that, it's very little. And so I did that for 4.5 years, and then my first faculty position here, and I've been here since for it. And so it's worked out. I was in my back pocket. I always had, if it never worked out, I just go back to medical school. But it's I've enjoyed my time here. So.
Cool. So I think just to help us get a better idea of where we should go in this conversation, we can go around the room and have you guys give a brief introduction of who you are. Might help which department you're in and what year you are, or like where you are in your training. We can start in the back corner over there and just head this way.
Hi, my name is Tiffany. I'm a second year postdoc in the internal medicine department. And I work on adrenal development and transition.
I'm Katie Basham. I'm postdoc also in internal medicine from Gary Hunter's lab. Nice to meet. I'm finishing my 5th year and on the job market currently interviewing positions and trying to start an academic lab in the fall.
I'm Christina. I'm actually from Yatriks lab. I'm his lab manager.
Hi, I'm Dashi. I'm a first year postdoc with Yatrik.
So I'm Nupur, physiology department, also started as a postdoc, now research investigator with Yatrik, trying to finish up my current projects and going to the job market soon.
My name is Nicole Bishmer-Hyson. I guess I'm a first year postdoc. I got my PhD in Ted Brenner's lab in July, and since then I've been continuing to work in his group, but I'll be moving in January to Memphis to do a postdoc at St. Jude Children's Hospital.
I'm Sarah Skonkovich. I'm a second year postdoc in molecular biology and mountains department and National Office Lab.
Steve Kregel, I'm I guess 5th year postdoc in Rural Science Lab, and I should be gone.
My name is Chris Armbruster. I'm first year postdoc since July in the Cohort Packins Lab in microbiology.
My name is Bob Farr. I'm from Peninsula Lab in pharmacology. I'm going to my second year postdoc.
Hi, I'm Julie. I am a research investigator in the physiology department, working with Jordan Shore.
I'm Daniel Walensky. I'm in Monica Duce's lab as a postdoc in the MCDB department.
I'm Rebecca. I'm a new postdoc in Scott Laser's lab.
I'm Noah, a PhD student in physiology.
I'm Shida Huang. I'm a postdoc, senior postdoc in Scott Laser's lab.
So it's mostly postdocs in one student? So maybe I'll just probe a question. Do all of you know, it looks like 2 people know what they want to do for sure in the next phase after their training. What about others? So how many want to stay in academic medicine?
Not medicine, but academia.
Academia, okay.
Yeah.
And then any that want to do something else? Okay. I guess another question is, how are you preparing for that? So 2 people are in the job market. So what has been your preparation to go to the job market?
It's been evolving over quite some time. So I would say I kind of started preparing about a year ago, really formally. Maybe should I put in a K?
Mm-hmm.
That was probably, for anyone that's thinking about it, the single best thing I did in my postdoc. I did a K-22, so it's like a K-99, but only the 3 years of R. And that really forced me to sit down and focus my efforts. What are my priorities? What are my goals? What projects am I taking with me? It forces a lot of conversations between you and your mentor that are difficult, but important and necessary. It really gets them on board. And then that also allowed me to bring other collaborators in. They really have a plan. Once I had that, applying for jobs was much less daunting because I had a blueprint blueprint of what I was gonna do. So then I went from that into cover letters, networking. I applied to some job ads. I sent some cold emails. I just did what I wanted. And I've had 2 interviews and I'm preparing for the Shah Talk now. So I'm kind of in the midst of it.
What about you, Joe?
Yeah, so Yatrik is my mentor, so we are always in constant touch with how we are doing. So he's well aware, but for you guys, I'm just starting. I will not yet there for the job market, but what I'm doing currently, after I got my major project out published, I'm looking forward to a job that I can also teach, let's say 50 teaching and 50 research. So I'm right now looking at the advertisements almost on a daily basis and made a short list what I would apply and making my portfolio ready in terms of cover letter, research statement, and 2 other components, teaching statement and diversity statement.
And then you're getting ready, right?
So I submitted a couple applications. I wasn't expecting to apply this year, but I had a Skype interview yesterday, so that's good. Yeah, I'm basically debating whether or not to go into a year of a research investigator track, just to,
Yeah. So my advice in this is that it takes quite a bit of time, and not only you to figure out what you want to do as you transition to an independent position, but to be able to have that conversation with your PI as well. And every PI is a little bit different on what aspects you can take and what aspects you can. And so if you know that this is the route you want to go, it's to your best interest to start thinking early, even before you think you're really ready. The other things that help, it was mentioned, is in general, there's this thought that K01s and K99s are difficult to obtain. They're not easy. Everything is competitive, but it is worthwhile to write a proposal. I think it organizes your thoughts. It gets your PI thinking of what areas that you're interested in, and they can also guide you. And the third, I think the other aspect of those is it starts really giving you an idea of what your research theme or niche is going to be and how you can contribute in a sea full of people that are doing either similar types of research, and where you're going to kind of build out your area that's unique. And so I think it's worthwhile, even though you think it's a long shot, it's worthwhile to become prepared for those. And so in many cases, it's quite different than an F award. So you need a prior publication. F awards, I think, depending on the institute, the idea you put down on paper, showing productivity with respect to some preliminary data is fine. But a K award, you have to have some evidence that you've been productive, and our currency has been our publication for those ones. And so I've sat on several K review panels, and what I can tell you is that in 70% of what we evaluate on those panels are the applicant. And so I think you can get by with okay science and being a stellar candidate than the opposite, where you have a stellar science and the candidate hasn't shown productivity with respect to publications, their research career goals, and their career development plan. Those all have to be top-notch for those types of awards, but it makes you start thinking very early for them. The one thing that we've been really trying to force NIH, and I've actually been in a few roundtable discussions, is the time limit. So right now, a K award for most institutes have to be before year 6, both the first and second submission. For K01s?
Oh, KO1.
Did I say K9? KO1s is year 6 or before, both submissions. K99s are even more rapid, is 4 years for first submission and resubmission. All has to happen within the first 4 years. We've made a little bit of progress, and so if you have a kid during your postdoc time, now you have an extra year automatic, which wasn't always the case. And they've been, in the last 3 years, been very lenient on waivers that we put in. And so I remember our postdoc had a death in the family, took several months off. He was allowed to put in a waiver to go in afterwards as well. But that's where you have to start thinking, is that you have 3 years to come up with an idea that you can propose for a K99. And unfortunately for international students or postdocs, that's your only option for these type of transition awards. And so it's worthwhile to start thinking early about what you want to do and how you want to start planning with respects to research and productivity, try to get papers out. And then the other thing is very, I would say, very PI specific, but if you have a large breadth of work that's going into some higher impact journal, those can take a long time to get out into publication. And it's a worthwhile conversation to have with your PI about putting that on bioRxiv. Reviews, as a reviewer, we can look at that and see, okay, this person has done all this work and has a great direction on what they want to go into. And so not every PI is for it, because there is some concern about getting scooped, but it is to your benefit if the crux of your work that you're proposing has not been published. It's worthwhile to put it on bioRxiv and having that conversation with your PI, because that's the only way a reviewer then at that point can see what level of productivity you've had and what the project and how it's going.
So does anyone have any questions, follow-up?
Can I follow up on the bioRxiv point?
Yeah.
From a study section perspective, is that also viewed favorably, and do people actually go and access that, in your experience?
They do. And it's, so I get what I can tell you in my study section, and I've served on a couple of them, is the culture of that study section has been, if it's published and peer reviewed, there's been less critique on that data. You know, whatever, if that data is how you are now formulating your hypothesis and what you're going to plan on doing. If it's in bioRxiv, I've seen people say, well, you know, that Western looked a little bit marginal in the bioRxiv, and they're proposing to do AIM2 based on that. And so there is a little bit, there are more critical of what's in bioRxiv, but I think it overall has been positive, saying that, you know, because you can't put all of your data in the grant. It's just, you only have basically 6 pages. And so I think overall it's been positive in the sense that saying that this is amazing data, this is a great direction that they're going, and they have all this data to back it up in this bioRxiv. And you know, you can never predict what journal is going to go to, but you can have an idea that this is solid work that's worthwhile to fund, and there's a lot of future avenues that they can look into.
And would you say something similar with respect to a search committee or a hiring committee, or would the conversation be different in any way?
I think it's a little bit different. I think we're looking at least some level of publications that have been peer reviewed. I do have seen some. So I'm on a BSSP committee, and where we try to recruit medical school wide, and I do see more and more bioRxiv papers there, but there's also some level of further details from either the letter writer saying that, look, this is in revision in Nature, or from the applicant themselves. This is under revision, or a planned submission never flies for that one. But if it's under revision, I think it's okay. Then that bioarchive has a little bit more meaning for search committees. Are you in the similar? Are you thinking of putting something on bioarchive?
Yeah.
I think overall, I mean, every lab has a little bit of different philosophy. Some wait till there's a revision and then they put it in. Some are extremely liberal, and that's the first thing that they publish is they put it on bioarchive. And so I think overall bioarchive has been positive. We get to see the work earlier, get to see what's out there. The other thing that I really didn't notice till we started putting some on was that you even get solicitations from journals. So I have one right now that has got 3 solicitations from journals. Although it's not ready, but it's still that's another bonus. You get journals looking at the paper, and so overall it's been, I think, positive. And I would say, depending on the field, like a colleague of ours in genetics, Liz Spiliotes, everything goes onto bioarchives first, and I think they have their own. When you're doing this huge GWAS studies, have their own way to submit the data, and it gets kind of vetted through that process. You can put comments in and see how what people are thinking about it and how you want to improve it before you go into publication. Was there any other? I thought I saw another hand up.
We can go to the list.
Yeah. So maybe before we. So does anyone have any teaching experience?
What do you count as teaching experience?
A classroom setting, lecture. That's one thing that we've tried to do, especially in the physiology department. But I can now see more and more departments that are doing it. So we have a postdoc-led course. Actually, Nooper directs it. And it gives exposure to postdocs to not only teach, but grade, have office hours, get evaluations. And I think more and more, if you're hitting the job market, there's a lot more positions that now that have a increased teaching load in addition to having research expectations. And so if you haven't taught as a postdoc, there are many avenues you can now, and it'd be worthwhile to do. Especially those classes where you can get teaching evaluations and hopefully get faculty evaluations if a faculty member sits in on the class as well. Those are quite helpful.
So I guess the first question we have here is, how do you see your role as a PI in the professional development of your students and postdocs?
I mean, I think it's completely integrated, and so that's a conversation that I think I have early with most students and postdocs is where they see themselves going after this training position. And the reason is that at I also direct the postdocs for physiology too, and far too many times, and I meet with everyone one-on-one. We started that about a year ago, and we're ramping it up for our second year. And the reason is that one, it starts that meeting one-on-one is great because it starts, especially early when they're early in their postdoc tenure, they start thinking about it. The reason it's completely integrated and starting having that conversation early is important is that everything that you guys do after this is competitive. You know, go to industry, go teaching positions, public advocacy, all of those positions are competitive. And it's not, there's no more that if it doesn't work out and I don't get a tenured faculty position, I think I'll go into industry, or maybe I'll do this. Everything is competitive. If you don't prepare yourself for those types of careers, you're not going to be competitive. So for example, if you have an interest in going to industry, it may be worthwhile to look at what industry is hiring, and do you have those expertise or not. So right now, if you look at most industry positions, there's a lot of expertise in metabolomics, LCMS, immune, and bioinformatics. And you can start preparing to gain those experiences if you don't already have them. And it's the same with teaching. And so we had a postdoc from a physiology faculty that went to Rochester. And so there was a decent amount of teaching expectation for that person. And if he didn't have prior teaching and prepared for that, I don't think he would have had that position. And so these are things to start thinking about very early. And I think that's how I kind of shape either projects or what types of techniques someone is learning. And so that's from graduate students to postdocs. For example, I just had a recent graduate student that went into doing patent law. Now just started working for a firm in Boston. And if she didn't start thinking about what she needed to do early, I don't think she would have landed the positions or had those. And so I think that is actually a conversation that all students and postdocs should have at some point very early with their mentor. You know, I want to stay in doing academic science. What do you think are the best ways to do it? I'm deciding between academia and industry. What do you think I need to do? I like to learn a little bit more about teaching. We don't have those experiences here. How do I get them? Those are worthwhile. And if your mentor doesn't know, there's people here that know how to help you in those cases. So for example, in general, I think I'm very good at mentoring students and postdocs that go down the same track as I do. But I've had students and postdocs that have gone down different tracks, and not to say I'm the best person, but I can try to find someone that can help them. Either students that have gone down that track, or postdocs, or Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies to help guide them in those avenues. The second is that there are fantastic career development programs that are put on by Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, individual postdoc groups here at the university, and those are worthwhile to visit. There's a lot of them, and it is important to have an idea of if this is going to be beneficial to you or not, but those are all different types of resources that you can reach out to. But you need to start thinking about it early. If you're in your year 4 and year 5 and you don't know, it starts to get a little bit late. And you have to prepare early. That's kind of the take-home message.
So, yeah, I guess from what you said there, you talked about some of how the students and postdocs you worked with has informed your mentorship style. And then there's a question here about how your experience as a mentee might have prepared you to be a mentor. You know, what sort of things do you do that maybe you didn't get or that your mentors did?
Yeah, I came from two polar opposite labs. And so when I was doing my graduate work, it was me, my PI, and another student. And had a extremely hands-on mentor that I knew almost every experiment and everything that we're doing. And then when I went to my postdoc, it was a group of 30 postdocs, and you met with your mentor once a week. Not to say that you couldn't meet with him more than that, but that's all we met with, and there was very little direction. So I remember joining that lab, and he shook my hand, and he said, "This will be your desk." And then I didn't talk to him for a week. And then I'm sitting at this desk the whole time when I made the wrong decision. But and so I tend to do both depending on the student or postdoc. I think as people are in the lab longer, the direction of the project is a little bit more laid out, and so a little bit more hands-off. Certain times when grants are going in and you need some data, you're a little bit more hands-on. And so I'm somewhere in between, and I think those two areas have shaped him because I can see the advantages to both, especially early on. Having a hands-on mentor is helpful, shapes the direction, and then later on, being hands-off, you start gaining a little bit more independence and thinking what areas you want to take with you when you're going out on the job market. And so I think I'm flexible. I do both, and it's I think in relation to where they are in their studies as well, they're further along. You know, I've had 2 recent postdocs that have gone on to tenure track positions, and I would say that their last 6 to 8 months, they were really optimizing things that they wanted to do in their own group. And so I had someone that I thought they just started, but it's been a year now since they've left the lab. But his last 6 or 8 months, he was interested in doing taking a bariatric surgery model with them, and so he was spending a lot of time optimizing that and understanding how to do that model so he could take it with them. And it was the same with the postdoc before that went to a tenure track faculty position, where I think that he was on a KO1 in the last half year or so. He was making cell lines and mouse models that he needed for his future lab, and so it was pretty hands-off in those cases, but it kind of varies depending on where they are in their training and also what's needed for a paper or a grant.
Did anyone have any follow-ups, any questions from that so far? Cool. Well, we can. So I have a question here, kind of tied into what you just mentioned. Are there any specific, recommendations or techniques you use, or I guess differences or similarities in mentoring postdocs versus graduate students?
Yeah, I think mentoring an early graduate student is quite different than a postdoc in the sense that they're just gaining an idea of what your lab is doing, what are the gaps, and shaping the project. Whereas a postdoc, the way I do postdoc is that they come in with a general idea of kind of the area of focus, and hopefully we gain data that we can go off in a direction. And so there's a little bit more guidance with students than there is with postdocs at the point of with respect to their project. I think that it's even more different with respects to once they decide what route they want to go. If a student says that, I think my future goal is to go to industry, I think that training is a little bit different in the sense that maybe, you may want to talk to people that are in industry, see what type of research going on, or, for example, a student that went into basically patent law, where she took she did, I don't want to say internship, but every Monday she was at the USPTO office in Detroit for their seminars. She took some time to study for the patent bar. And so I think it for early students or more for senior students and postdocs, the mentoring is very similar. But I think the mentoring styles differ with respects to the areas that they want to go into. I think the major differences are providing some level of mentorship but more time to explore. That's the key, is you have to have some time to explore what's out there so you know what you like and don't like. And so for those postdocs that don't see teaching in their future, you should try it. I had 0 teaching experience, and when you start a faculty position, or a lot of faculty positions, you're protected from teaching for the first year or so. And then I was thrown into GI physiology for medical and dental students, and I hated it. It was the first time I've taught ever. We didn't have to do any teaching in graduate school either. And it was just a different, all I see is computers. And, it's supposed to be a class of like 150, and there's like 20 people there. And no interaction, no questions. I had a review session at the end of the week, and then I have 150 students who want to know what's on the exam. And so I hated that teaching experience. But then when I started teaching more graduate school, or even the small groups for medical schools, I ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. And I really like it. And so it's something worthwhile to explore. And I think no matter where you go, you're going to be expected to teach. And it's something worth gaining experience for. Yeah, go ahead. Either.
So you developed a lot your mentoring philosophy in your own lab and with your own mentors, but you also mentioned that you took on some mentoring capacity at the department level. And I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted, because it's not something that's in my department, and it's not something that I've seen university-wide in terms of mentoring postdoc and having regular checkup.
Yeah, I think if your department's not doing it, it's very beneficial. And so there's a couple of things that I think it helps. I think it just helps having another person to talk to that's outside of your PI. And so some departments require a mentoring committee, and if you have a K award, it's worthwhile. I think most people that have some type of K award to put it in decide to have a mentoring committee on paper. It's worthwhile to meet with them as you put it in. But yeah, so our department, we just started, actually this was started by OGPS as well, a recommendation. And so now I think there are 12 or 13 chairs for departments?
7.
Oh, well, there are 7 postdoctoral chairs in different departments. I know CDB has, what department are you?
My official department is anesthesiology, but I'm working in neuroscience, which is not an actual department.
Yeah. And we do have a few clinical departments that have chairs as well.
One clinical department, mostly basic science department.
It's mostly basic science, but then it's worthwhile for you to set up a mentoring committee. I think the advantage has been when you're in, and so if, for example, because I'm the postdoctoral chair, the people that are in my lab meet with the chair, meet with our department chair at some point, one-on-one. But the advantage is several. One is that I think when you're in a lab, especially as a postdoc, a lot of your conversation is based around your data, what you want to do next, what are the bigger pictures of this type of project. And many times it's not based on what you would like to do for your career. Sometimes postdocs are not comfortable telling their PIs that the project is not great. We don't get time for career exploration. I want to teach a little. And so it gives another avenue in the way that the physiology department has done it. So a lot of the times this is done under confidence that, I don't go out to their PI and say, why are you doing this to, this person? And so a lot of it I just write up, and if there's something that's very extreme, I do report it to the chair. And I think the chair may have a conversation at some point. But it's done under confidence, so it just gives them another avenue to either vent, or we try to do something about it with respects to setting up a mentoring committee, which we've done for a few postdocs, or sending out an email saying this person would be great for this teaching component because we're trying to add something new. And so I think in general it's been overall great. And then it gives me an idea as a postdoctoral chair what everyone's doing, and at what level they are. And then the last thing that has been helpful is that, especially meeting with them early, it gets to start talking about what they plan to do. And that's where I've started noticing that sometimes industry or these other careers outside of an academic bench scientist is an afterthought. And people say, well, you know, if it doesn't work out in 4 years and I don't get 4 or 5 years and I don't get many applications, I'll probably apply to this position where you don't need as much, you don't need many high impact papers or breadth of the research, and they have a little bit more teaching, and I should be fine. And you start realizing, well, if you don't have the teaching portfolio, you're not going to be fine in those positions as well. But at least it starts the conversation. Sometimes you don't have with your PIs.
So I do want to add to Julie that it's a pilot. And the goal is to spread to all the departments over the next few years.
For people in departments that don't have that, in the same boat as you, do you have a little bit of advice on how to reach out as a postdoc to try to get those mentors? I found that as a graduate student, it's very easy because there's an expectation that they will agree to a graduate committee. But for a postdoc, it's kind of this gray area, and it feels like you're asking for something that there's not a lot of buying maybe from the faculty.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I have a question. You would probably know best. Aren't all now postdocs in clinical departments expected to have a mentoring committee? No, I'm on a handful of them, and I don't.
I've never seen anything about it personally.
I don't know if it's a requirement per se or not.
And the way that this was, set up was via the PI. And so the PI reached out to. I'm on actually 3, so 2 in the clinical department. Actually, all 3 in the clinical department, but 2 are MD PhDs, and then the third one is a PhD in a clinical department. And the way all 3 of them were set up was via the PI. They reached out, said they want a mentoring committee, and we meet formally twice a year. And so if this is something that you're interested in, it'd be worthwhile to have a conversation with your PI to say that this project needs this level, this type of expertise. And it's not only important to have the expertise that you want, but probably the diversity of experience, right? Someone that's more senior, if your PI is not senior, if you are thinking about industry or teaching, maybe a PI that's had trainees that have gone that route would be worthwhile to put in. But I would start with your PI. If not, then.
So you think it's more effective for the PI to ask than the postdoc to ask for that?
I think so.
Okay.
Not to say that faculty won't be responsive to postdocs, but I think that's the most direct route to go.
Do we have any other follow-ups on that?
And I think that's what, more to that point, I think that's what some of these fellowships also do, is get you thinking about every fellowship that you write, students for F awards, postdocs for F awards, or these transition K awards, you have a mentoring committee there. And usually for the postdocs, that mentoring committee is just on paper. Rarely do they really meet, that I've noticed. And so, but if you have, it'd be, at least you've thought about who you want on your mentoring committee, and it'd be worthwhile to reach out to say that, could we meet once every 6 months, which is, not a big ask to do. To that point, we now have, I want to say at least 2 postdoctoral fellowships. So one from LSI and one from this Pioneer program, where that is a major requirement. They meet with their committees twice a year, and then the second time, not only their committees, but they meet with both the directors. So that's Carol Perrin and I, that we go over progress, what their future expectations are, what their future plans are for it. And so I think overall, if you haven't set up one, at some point it could be worthwhile. I think to be honest, I think it's better as you start figuring out your direction and what you want to do for it. I think these one-on-one conversations are best to have no matter what time you are in training, because it starts getting you thinking about what you want to do in the future. But as a mentoring committee, once you start having a good solid basis for what you want, where your research is going, it's a worthwhile thing to do.
Cool. So I think a lot of this is essentially how you approach getting your students and postdocs ready for the job market. We have one question here that talks about how you improve yourself as a mentor. So how do you solicit honest feedback from your trainees about how so you can continue to improve yourself as a mentor?
Yeah, actually, I've not done it.
Okay.
That I could think of. I meet with everybody one-on-one, and I think I've had both students and postdocs that have critiqued me, and maybe I have changed because of it. I think the one thing that I've done, for sure I've evolved as a mentor because I've trained more. And I think early on, and this may be true for a lot of junior faculty, there was a tendency to be a little bit more selfish in the sense that I can remember a time when I had a CMB student, and I think it had probably been more beneficial for that student to integrate 2 papers into one bigger paper. And because of a grant, we broke it up because I needed to get a paper. And so it's more true now than it was true then. Putting in a first grant, you should have a paper from your lab. And like I said, it's more true now. And so then I rushed the paper out, we broke it into half, and then he ended up getting 2 solid papers rather than one really, really good paper. And not to say I think it hurt him, but I think depending on the labs he was interested in, had the reputation of a student getting those types of papers. And so now in year 10, I'm comfortable with where I'm at, and everything has been really to the benefit of the trainee. If I have someone that is dead set on going into academia, and they have a story that is not only significant, but has an interesting mechanism, innovative, I'll do everything we can to try to get into the best journal that we can do. And I think as the way search committees are, those papers are still valued. And I hope that changes, but it hasn't, and I've been on several of them, And so I think that's always looked at, where have they published. I think there's starting to slowly evolve, but still in most cases that hasn't changed all that much. And so we try to do what we can to get into the best. There are times when I think we could hold a paper for another year and a half and it would do well, but it doesn't benefit the student. They're going into a career path where the training and expertise with respect to what they want to do in the future is more important than where the papers have been published. And so I think I've been much more flexible in that type of training as it's gone on. And that's just now that just comes with experience and training more students and more postdocs and really getting a feel for what they need to do. I think in general, if a postdoc wants to go into industry, I think it's more beneficial to have a breadth of techniques that are conducive to where they want to work in industry rather than having a Nature Cell or Science paper. It's not to me, it doesn't matter to them. I actually just gave a talk at industry in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and that's the first thing that they were saying, was that, we're looking for people that are able to analyze this type of data, or we're looking for people that have expertise in this assay rather than they publish and sell. And so And so that's how it's changed over time.
How do you choose and select, or how do you select and find trainees? You know, obviously students it's easier, but especially like that in the early years versus now.
So there's a couple of things that I've done. I've never relied on letters because I've never received a really bad letter. From all the times I've gotten letters from postdocs or even students. And so the two things that I think that have been helpful is how productive they've been in the lab. And so I'm not, again, looking for cell science or nature papers if their lab doesn't publish in that area, but how productive have they been with respects to what the lab has been publishing is important to me. And the second is I always call up the PI at some point. I've had a conversation with most PIs, and I think it's much more difficult to, it's very difficult to sugarcoat when you're on the phone. You get the positives and the negatives a little bit better. And I think those two have been the major criteria for my selection.
What about for students where they may not have productivity and they may or may not have had a prior PI?
So I have not been, I guess I just been lucky. One is that the quality of students here are very good. You get an idea of how they're going to be as they rotate. But I've never told a student that they can't join my lab since I've been here, and that's been mostly because they've been good. And so I can't think of a student that has done so terribly during their rotation that I had to make that decision. But overall, I tell students when they're rotating is that the main thing that they want to make sure is I'm not looking for a bunch of data during a rotation because that rarely happens, especially now that most students are doing these half rotations. But I want to make sure that the lab is a fit, my mentoring style is a fit, the lab environment is a good fit, you know, both the, and then are they interested in the project in some aspects? Everyone does amazing science here, and so when a student joins a lab, the science can be a great fit or a good fit. They're going to get something out of it, and so these other ancillary things that are important. But I've never really had to make a tough decision on a student as long as I've been here, and that's both masters and graduate students. And that's not true for everybody. I mean, there are PIs that are very selective as well, and it'd be worthwhile to have a conversation to see how they select students. But I've been pretty lucky, and everyone is. I've had now. This is both masters and graduate students. I've had 9 or 10, and they've all done very well with respects to what their end goal was, and I think they've met it in some aspect, in almost every aspect.
So, should we do one more? Or is that about 2 minutes? One more. All right. So, what do you find the most challenging or the most rewarding about being a mentor?
So, I think you'll probably hear from most mentors. And it's completely true. I think the most rewarding aspect is for us to get our trainees where they want to get to. That's been the most rewarding aspect of the position is throughout the years, everyone works hard in labs and they work hard for an end goal, and so to get someone to that goal is extremely satisfying. And then either be a tenure track position, going to a law firm, going to industry, that's been the most rewarding aspect. The most difficult aspect of that is like I've mentioned, is easy. I think I'm a much better mentor, or I probably give much better advice on those that go down the same route as I've gone down, because I just know it, what people are looking for. And so to be able to try to mentor both students and postdocs into other careers such as industry, or most recent one was, like I mentioned, was doing patent law. There's a learning curve as well, but it's worthwhile, and I think it'd probably be more difficult at other places. We have the resources here that can not only help the students or the trainees, but also the mentors understanding what they need to do to get to that final goal.
Cool. Do you want to have any follow-ups?
So maybe I have a couple take-home messages that I could think of, is that really start thinking early of what you want to do. The earlier you have an idea, the more you can prepare for it. Two, it's okay to not have an idea of what you want to do afterwards, but then you should start exploring and carving out time to explore. Most postdocs are here for research, but this is a training position, and I think most faculty realize that. And so obviously putting out research output is important, but having time to explore is just as important. And so you may have to work a little bit harder if you want to do that, but it's worthwhile. And there are many avenues here. You guys are at a lucky place because we have those options to explore. We bring monthly speakers in our physiology department. OGPS has speakers, and so it's worthwhile to come and do that. I had another one.
Another consistent theme was set up a mentoring network.
Yeah, I think there are different ways to do it. One is setting up an official mentoring committee. Your department, you can meet with another faculty. The other is we have close collaborations with a lot of PIs here, in the sense that I have the student or postdoc initiate the collaboration, and so they're in contact with another PI. And I think all of that helps. And so it's not always just setting up a true mentoring committee, but if you're collaborating with someone and your PI is initiating the collaboration, it's worthwhile for you to also maybe email both the PIs or have a conversation with the collaborating PI on what the next steps are. That sets up your network and gives you another avenue to talk to somebody. So it's not just the mentoring committee, but all these other things that you can do to help. And the other take-home message is that no matter what you decide to do at this time, either be industry, academia, science advocacy, writing is important in all of those aspects. And so I don't want you to take away from this that I don't need to put in a K fellowship, or I don't need to put in a fellowship just because I'm not going to do work as an academic bench scientist or running a lab. I think any type of writing will help you because you're going to be doing it no matter where you go. I have a student that's in industry, and I just gave a talk in industry, and the way that they get projects done is they write proposals, and they have to shoot it up the ladder to make sure it's worthwhile. And so wherever you go, you're going to be writing, and it's worthwhile to write as many fellowships, try to get as much different exposures to writing as you can. I know it takes time, but it's something that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, and it's going to be an important component of it. And this is the time where you can gain experience, where you have feedback from your mentor. If there are other authors on the paper, you get feedback. When you're putting in a fellowship, you have a mentoring committee. It's worthwhile to shoot the grants out to them. Ms. Shah has a great editing system here that many people don't utilize because you have to be work ahead of time. You have to get the grants to them like 6 weeks ahead of time. But it's a great resource. And so those are things to take advantage of to become better at that, because you're going to be utilizing it for the rest of your lives after this.
Thank you.